Imagine an emperor so untethered by custom that he flaunted his own sisters as lovers before the entire Roman court. Step inside Caligula's torch-lit dining hall, where power was measured in gasps, and every forbidden touch rewrote the rules of empire. The marble triclinium of the Palatine Palace glows under the flickering light of 100 oil lamps, their flames casting dancing shadows across frescoed walls that have witnessed the rise and fall of gods made flesh. It is the year 37 A.D., and Rome's newest emperor has summoned the most powerful men in the empire to feast at his table. 3 guests recline to each dining couch in the ancient tradition, their silk-draped forms arranged like living statues awaiting the evening's entertainment. But tonight something is different. The air itself seems to hold its breath as footsteps echo through the marble corridors, the distinctive ring of golden slippers against stone. Caligula enters, barely 24 years old, his slight frame draped in purple that catches the lamplight like liquid fire. Upon his feet gleam shoes of beaten gold, each step a declaration that he walks not as mortal man, but as Apollo himself descended from Olympus. The assembled senators and consuls rise as protocol demands, but their movement falters as they witness what comes next. With deliberate ceremony, Caligula guides 3 women to the couches of highest honor, positions traditionally reserved for Rome's most distinguished magistrates. Drusilla, Agrippina, and Julia Livilla take their places not as honored guests, but as the evening's central figures. The silence stretches like a taut bowstring. Patrician wives clutch their wine cups with trembling fingers. Even the musicians hesitate, their lyres falling momentarily silent before resuming with uncertain melodies. Only the nervous clatter of serving platters fills the void where gasps should be. Tonight, incest is not whispered rumor lurking in palace shadows. It is the very centerpiece of imperial entertainment. The blood that flows through Caligula's veins carries with it the weight of a dynasty built on ambition and stained by tragedy. From Augustus, the first emperor who reshaped Rome from republic to empire, the line descended through Germanicus, beloved general whose victories in Germania made him a hero to every Roman citizen. Germanicus wed Agrippina the Elder, a woman whose noble bearing masked a will of iron, and together they produced children destined for greatness and doom in equal measure. But the Julio-Claudian bloodline was cursed from its very conception. Whispers followed every death, every marriage, every birth. When Germanicus died mysteriously in Syria, poison was suspected. When Tiberius ascended to power, he systematically destroyed Germanicus's family, first exiling Agrippina the Elder to a barren island where she starved herself to death rather than submit, then ensuring 2 of her sons met similar fates in dark prison cells. Only Caligula and his 3 sisters survived the purge, but survival came at a price measured in innocence lost. As a child, Caligula was summoned to live on the island of Capri, where Emperor Tiberius had retreated into a world of perverse indulgences. There, in villa chambers reeking of wine and corruption, the young prince learned that taboos were merely tools, levers of fear that the powerful could pull to bend others to their will. Imperial doctrine demanded blood purity, the preservation of divine lineage through careful marriage alliances. But when absolute power collides with such doctrine, the result is inevitable. Incest transforms from ultimate sin into ultimate statement. In Caligula's twisted logic, if he was truly divine, then mortal laws of kinship held no dominion over his desires. Drusilla stands as the eldest, her regal bearing earning her the nickname of second mother to Caligula during their turbulent childhood. The historian Philo would later describe her as possessing an almost supernatural calm, a dignity that seemed to emanate from her very bones. She had been the one to comfort her younger brother during the darkest nights on Capri, when Tiberius's cruelties threatened to shatter what remained of his sanity. Agrippina the Younger burns with a different fire. politically shrewd beyond her years, her mind already calculating the moves that would one day place her own son Nero upon the imperial throne. Where Drusilla offers maternal comfort, Agrippina provides intellectual challenge, matching her brother's wit with barbed observations that slice through court flattery like a blade through silk. Her beauty is undeniable, but it serves as mere decoration for an ambition that rivals any senator's. Julia Livilla, the youngest of the trio, carries herself with a devastating beauty that poets would later immortalize in verses they dared not publish. Her tongue cuts as sharp as her sister's, but where Agrippina wields words like weapons of war, Livilla employs them as instruments of seduction. She understands the power that flows from desire, having watched grown men stumble over themselves merely for the privilege of hearing her laugh. These three women shared an upbringing unlike any other Roman children of their station. Raised in Germanicus's military camps along the Rhine frontier, they learned Greek philosophy from captured scholars and Roman strategy from battle-hardened centurions. Their education in public favor began early. They knew how to smile for crowds while memorizing which faces belonged to friends and which to enemies. Legend claims they pledged their virginity not to the gods, but to each other's ambitions, swearing a childhood oath that their bodies would serve only the family's rise to power. It was a pact that would soon shatter against the rocks of imperial madness. Suetonius, writing decades after the blood had dried, recorded what happened next, with the clinical precision of a physician documenting a fever's progression. Caligula moved between his sisters like a connoisseur sampling rare wines, taking bites from their lips before the assembled court, then disappearing behind silk screens erected for purposes that required no explanation. The emperor had transformed the sacred act of dining into theater of the obscene. Traditional banquet protocol crumbled like parchment in flames. Toasts were offered not to Rome's glory or the gods' favor, but to the bridal trio. Wine poured ceremoniously over the sisters' feet, while servants received explicit orders to address them as dominae, the title reserved for married women of highest rank. Every gesture carried symbolic weight, every touch a deliberate inversion of Roman custom. In Caligula's fevered imagination, he was recreating the divine relationships of Olympus itself. As Jupiter had taken Juno as both sister and wife, while maintaining Minerva as his favored daughter, so too would the mortal god of Rome claim divine right over bonds that lesser men called forbidden. The emperor's logic was as twisted as it was absolute. If he truly descended from the gods, then mortal taboos were chains meant for slaves, not shackles for divinity. The court's reaction fractured along lines of terror and calculation. Some guests forced laughter through lips white with shock, their mirth as hollow as tomb echoes. Others sat in frozen silence, memorizing every sordid detail for letters that would be smuggled to allies in distant provinces. A few, the most cunning, began composing mental eulogies, not for the emperor, but for the empire itself. Within those torch-lit walls the unthinkable became routine. Taboo was not merely broken, but ground to powder beneath imperial sandals. Terror became the currency of survival, and objection transformed from civic duty into suicidal madness. In June of the year 38 A.D., fever claimed Drusilla with the merciless efficiency that disease reserves for even the most exalted. But Caligula refused to accept what physicians and priests alike declared inevitable. He barred the palace healers from her chambers, stationing himself as her sole guardian against death's approach. For 3 days and nights he maintained his vigil, whispering prayers to gods he claimed as equals, bargaining with forces that acknowledged no mortal authority. When Drusilla's breath finally stilled, something fundamental broke within the emperor's mind. He clung to her cooling corpse with the desperate grip of a drowning man clutching driftwood, his wails echoing through marble corridors until even the Praetorian Guard shifted uncomfortably at their posts. Rome's master had become madness incarnate, and madness, it seemed, grieved like any mortal man. The emperor's decree thundered across the 7 hills. All laughter was banned from the Eternal City for 7 days. Citizens caught smiling-faced imprisonment, while tavern-keepers shuttered their establishments rather than risk entertaining customers who might forget their enforced sorrow. Rome became a city of whispers and tears, mourning not for the deceased princess, but for their own terror. But Caligula's grief demanded more than silence. He summoned the Senate and commanded them to do what no legislative body in Roman history had ever done: consecrate a mortal woman as divine. Drusilla was elevated to godhood as Diva Drusilla, proclaimed equal to Venus herself in beauty and power. Senators who had witnessed her participation in unspeakable acts now found themselves voting to establish her eternal worship. Public altars sprouted across the city like mushrooms after rain. Newlywed brides began invoking Drusilla's name for fertility blessings, their prayers blurring the line between worship and scandal. The goddess who had once shared her brother's bed now received offerings from women seeking her divine favor in their own marriage chambers. With Drusilla's divine ascension complete, the surviving sisters found themselves adrift in a palace where grief had curdled into something far more dangerous. Jealousy poisoned the air they breathed as Agrippina and Livilla competed for the favor that death had permanently secured for their eldest sister. Each smile from Caligula was weighed like gold, each glance parsed for meaning that might preserve their lives or seal their doom. The emperor's demands grew more elaborate and humiliating with each passing month. When Saturnalia arrived in December, he forced both sisters to parade before the assembled court dressed as followers of Dionysus, their noble Roman stolas replaced with revealing chitons that left little to imagination. Wine-stained and barefoot, they danced to flutes and drums, while senators averted their eyes and counted the cost of witnessing imperial degradation. Political marriage, that ancient tool of Roman diplomacy, became impossible. What foreign king would accept a bride who had been publicly displayed as her brother's concubine? What Roman noble would risk the emperor's jealous wrath by claiming what he considered his divine property? The sisters found themselves trapped in gilded isolation, too valuable to kill, but too contaminated to release. Salvation seemed to arrive in the form of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Drusilla's widower and Caligula's former favorite. Whispers spoke of conspiracy, of plans to remove the mad emperor and restore some semblance of sanity to the throne. But palace walls have ears, and those ears belong to men whose survival depended on their master's favor. The accusations came swift and brutal in 39 AD. Both sisters were charged with adultery and treason, their alleged conspiracy with Lepidus painted as betrayal of the deepest kind. Within days, ships carried them to the Pontian Islands, those barren rocks in the Tyrrhenian Sea where political inconveniences were sent to disappear. Their heads were shaven like common criminals, their imperial purple exchanged for coarse wool, their banquet halls replaced by cells where meager rations reminded them daily that love, in Caligula's hands, had always been indistinguishable from lethal control. Behind the Senate House's marble columns, Rome's most powerful men gathered in hushed clusters, their voices barely rising above whispers as they debated a motion that none dared formally propose. The draft condemnation of imperial incest lay hidden in scrolls that trembling hands had written but would never unroll in open session. Fear had proven stronger than outrage, and survival trumped even the most basic moral duty. In the narrow streets where common Romans lived and worked, a different kind of rebellion took root. Satirical slogans appeared on tavern walls like weeds pushing through stone, crude verses that likened Rome's emperor to the pharaohs of Egypt, where brothers wed sisters as casually as they donned their crowns. The graffiti would vanish by dawn, scrubbed away by nervous shopkeepers who understood that humor could be treasonous when aimed at divine ears. The Vestal Virgins, guardians of Rome's sacred flame, and arbiters of purity laws sent formal petition after formal petition to the imperial palace. Their carefully worded requests for clarification on matters of sacred versus profane fell into a void of imperial indifference. Caligula had no time for priestesses who questioned the divine right to reshape morality itself. Their letters gathered dust, while their temple fires burned lower each night, tended by women who wondered if their own vows meant anything in a world where incest had become entertainment. When treasury funds that should have purchased grain for the city's poor were diverted instead to construct the temple of the divine siblings, hunger finally gave riots their voice. Bread lines dissolved into angry mobs that surged through the forum, their chants no longer begging for sustenance, but demanding the return of reason. The emperor's sexual spectacles had become inextricably linked with economic despair, transforming private disgust into public rage that threatened to consume everything the Julio Claudians had built. The sacred and profane had become so entangled that Romans could no longer tell where divinity ended and madness began. Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus set his stylus to wax tablet 80 years after the torches had dimmed in Caligula's banquet hall. Yet his words carried the weight of imperial archives that survived even the most dangerous emperors. As keeper of correspondence under Hadrian, Suetonius possessed access to palace records that lesser historians could only dream of consulting: daily logs, dinner guest lists, even the private memoranda of long-dead chamberlains who had witnessed unspeakable acts and lived to document them. Cassius Dio, writing from his senator's perspective decades later, added details that only someone intimate with palace protocol could know: the precise arrangement of dining couches, the rotation of bedroom guards, the specific wines served when sisters shared their brother's cup. His account bristles with the insider knowledge of a man who understood how imperial households functioned, down to which servants were trusted, with which secrets. Even Juvenal, master of satirical verse, could not resist veiled references to what he called incest wine, the vintage that flowed when Roman virtue died in marble halls. His poems danced around explicit accusation with the skill of a man who knew that certain truths could only be spoken in metaphor, lest they become his epitaph. Modern scholars debate whether these accounts represent historical fact or character assassination designed to justify Caligula's inevitable assassination. The tales seem almost too lurid to believe, too perfectly crafted to serve the political needs of those who came after. Yet the consistency across sources separated by decades and social class suggests something more troubling than mere propaganda. When multiple witnesses tell the same impossible story, the impossible begins to seem merely improbable. And in the fever-dream world of imperial Rome, improbable and actual often prove to be the same thing. By the winter of 40 A.D., the Praetorian Guard had grown weary of protecting an emperor who had bankrupted Rome's treasury to fund divine delusions. These hardened soldiers, men who had sworn blood oaths to defend the purple, now found themselves reduced to props in theatrical displays that made mockery of Roman honor. Every humiliation ritual they were forced to witness chipped away at their loyalty like water wearing down stone. Cassius Chaerea emerged as the conspiracy's unlikely leader, a grizzled tribune whose voice had been damaged in Germanic campaigns, leaving him with a high-pitched tone that Caligula mocked mercilessly during public ceremonies. But beneath that damaged throat beat the heart of a man who remembered when Rome's legions conquered for glory rather than spectacle. His whispered recruitment speeches carried a simple message: the sisters' shame had become the empire's shame, and both demanded cleansing with steel. The moment came on January 24th, 41 A.D., in a cramped corridor beneath the theater complex where Caligula had gone to watch rehearsals of Greek tragedy. The irony was lost on no one. Rome's greatest tragedy was about to unfold in the shadows, while actors above performed scripted sorrow. As the emperor emerged from a narrow passageway, 30 Praetorian daggers found their mark in quick succession, each thrust a vote of no confidence delivered in bronze and blood. Agrippina survived her island exile, returning to Rome under her uncle Claudius's more rational rule, her political instincts intact, despite years of meager rations and humiliation. She would live to place her son Nero on the throne, proving that ambition, unlike virtue, could survive any ordeal. But Julia Livilla never saw the mainland again. Poison found her somewhere on the journey home, administered by hands unknown but motives clear. The message echoed through every corridor of imperial power. Even absolute authority could not outrun public disgust when it paraded too far beyond the boundaries of human decency. Caligula's bloody end became the cautionary tale that haunted every emperor who followed, a reminder carved in memory rather than marble of how quickly divine pretensions could crumble into mortal consequences. Claudius, his stammering uncle who inherited the purple through accident of survival, immediately banned siblings from sharing the same dining couch at state banquets. What had once been imperial theater became forbidden proximity, regulated by protocol born from collective trauma. Yet the stain proved indelible. When Nero ascended the throne years later, whispers of his affair with his own mother Agrippina carried the weight of inherited sin. Each rumored embrace between emperor and mother was measured against Caligula's precedent, as if incest had become the Julio-Claudian family curse, a poison in the bloodline that no amount of purple could purify. Legitimacy itself became suspect when tied to a dynasty that had normalized the unthinkable. Christian writers seized upon Caligula's reign like vultures claiming carrion, wielding his story as irrefutable proof that pagan Rome was morally rotten from its very foundation. In their treatises and sermons, the emperor's sisters became symbols of everything their new faith had come to replace. A world where power corrupted so absolutely that even the bonds of family became tools of degradation. The torches that once illuminated Caligula's banquet hall had been extinguished for centuries before Rome itself fell. Yet their light revealed a truth that echoes across millennia. When rulers parade their private perversions as public spectacle, when they transform taboo into entertainment for the masses, the very fabric of society begins to unravel thread by thread. The empire's collapse would not come for centuries, but its moral death had already occurred in those marble chambers where sisters served as centerpieces and brothers claimed divinity through degradation.